right. Well, today we are wrapping up a series called No One's Favorite Bible Verses. If you're new here, this is your first time, my name is Lou. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm glad you're with us. What we like to do around here is take our messages and group them together in what we call a series. And so today's the last part of a series, and it might feel a little bit like you're coming in at the end of the movie, but hopefully we'll try to catch you up a little bit. We're talking about Bible verses that are no one's favorite, in case you weren't able to connect those dots. The idea is that really there are some Bible verses, you've probably seen them on Instagram and on your friends' pin boards, on Pinterest, or in the bathroom of your mother-in-law who goes to church, and they're just like nice, they're comforting, they're inspiring, encouraging, like rejoice always, or be anxious about nothing, or love one another, stuff like that. Just like, great stuff. You'll see it in like the religious section and the Hallmark cards, right? Great stuff, really inspiring. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then there are other ones that are just not that inspiring. Some of them are weird, like the idea of not shaving the hair on the sides of your head. That's in one of the ancient Old Testament laws. And it's like, well, what do we do with that? Is that for us right now? We're supposed to not shave the hair on the side. That's why I cut my hair. Or that's why I was growing out my hair. No. So really, there are some, and we're just not sure what to do with them because they're weird. And then there are others that are no one's favorite because they're hard. They're challenging. And at first glance, we read them and we're like, ooh, that's tough. And so maybe we skip over them or we just try not to talk about them. Specifically, over the past few weeks, we've been talking about some of the stuff that Jesus said. That is really tough. Like at one point, he said to someone, sell everything you have. It's like, well, is he talking to me? Is he talking to us? And for me, that for a long time, if you don't know my story, I was very resistant to church and God and that whole idea for a long time. And it was verses like that where I'd be like, you see, none of those church people are actually doing what Jesus says. They're just kind of picking and choosing. And then I, for myself, started to believe some of it. It started to make sense to me. But I still would just hope no one would bring up those verses because I liked the things that I had, and I didn't want to sell them, And there's another passage we talked about on week 2 where Jesus said, if you want to be great, you got to serve everyone. Servant, slave, he says, of all. So does that mean I just got to let people walk all over me? So we just especially on Long Island, you don't let people walk all over you, right? You got to stand your ground. And so I would just skip over certain things. And because I was afraid really of people bringing them up, and they made me feel like a fraud. But hopefully you've seen, if you've been with us, that really these passages, when we understand them in context, they have so much to offer us. And often we're wrong about our initial conclusions that we come to. And they still may not be your favorite verses in the Bible, but they have so much to say to us today in 2023. So today, I'll tell you a little story, all right? So my wife, Allie, she's downstairs. She loves Chip and Joanna Gaines, all right? If you haven't heard about them, I don't know where you've been because they're doing everything now, right? They've got cookbooks. It started with houses. They're just doing everything. And Joanna Gaines is, just the best in our house. Allie would watch Fixer Upper, and I would be watching it too, and that's the show. But if you don't know who they are, I'm sorry. They fix up houses, okay? And these people, they just walk into houses, and they're like, all right, let's get this. And Joanna takes out her pen, and she's like, all right, knocking down that wall, open floor plan. We're going to do this over here, that over there. She takes trash and hangs it up, and it's beautiful, and all this stuff, right? So we went looking for a house, and this was several years ago. We got into a house, and it was a dump, but not to us because we watched Fixer Upper. And so we walk in, and we're like, oh, knocking down that wall. And like we're looking at the yard is gross. Like it's got so many issues. And we're like, no problem for us. We're Chip and Joanna Gaines, right? Well, so we get in the house. We purchased the house. It was great. And I did like the molding around the doors. And got doors from Home Depot, because that's, doors, I feel like that's a good place to start, right? So I finished the doors upstairs. We're out of money. And really what it came down to is like, we didn't think, all right, it wasn't that dramatic. There were some other things we were able to fix up, right? But in theory, we didn't think about what it would take to get the job done, to actually like pull it off. Right? So Jesus, like one day he's talking to these people and he explains to them what it takes to be able to pull off following him. Have you ever thought about that? Like, what does it actually take to be able to follow Jesus? Now, when I say follow Jesus, what I don't mean, you might be hearing like, what does it take to be a Christian? Or what does it take to believe? Or what does it take to go to heaven? That's not what we're talking about. What I mean is, what does it take to look at Jesus as the leader and us as the followers, if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, and be like, I'm gonna do that? What does it take to be able to love people the way that Jesus loved people? And even if you're like not into the church thing and you were just yanked here and promised lunch afterwards, what do you think? What do you think it takes to follow Jesus? Commitment. A lot of people say commitment, dedication. You just gotta like determination, like, all right, I'm doing it, Or knowledge, maybe you gotta know all the Bible verses. Or experience, or maybe it's like intense spiritual discipline. Like I'm just gonna pray nonstop. Maybe that's like the people that are able to treat people the way Jesus treated them. Maybe that's what they have, right? Jesus answers this question for us in a pretty like abrasive way, all right? But what's so interesting about this is that I think, and I could be wrong, but I think that whether or not you understand what Jesus means when he says the words that he says to this crowd, like could make the difference for you. It could flip the switch on whether or not your whole idea of God and faith and Christianity is like uplifting, or if it's a weight that you carry. If it's something that you actually like, or something you put up with or push away. There is so much that hangs in the balance of understanding Jesus's words here. But often we don't dig into them because they're scary, all right? And so here they are. He's talking to a big crowd, and he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. He says, and yes, even their own life. Such a person cannot be my disciple. Like it's just about everyone, except your dog. He says, and whoever does not carry their cross and follow me. Cross, not like carry a cross around your neck, like wear a necklace, but like the picture of Roman execution, the torturous form of Roman execution. He says, if you won't carry your cross and follow me, you can't be my disciple. It's pretty intense. It doesn't seem very Jesus-like. Hate. My mom, by the way, is not here this week. So that's why we're talking about this first. No, you could walk away from this very quickly, and your initial conclusion could be, 1, hate your mom. All right, if we're gonna sum it up. Or maybe Jesus is saying, hate everyone and die. Be willing to give up your life. Those that are closest to you, hate them. Or, the way I understood it initially is to renounce your family, those you love, and give up your life, or at least be willing to give up your life. Or, Jesus wants nothing to do with you. That's how this passage first hits me. And it doesn't seem very Jesus-like. It also doesn't seem to me like anyone's doing this. Right? Like, this is not something that goes down smooth. Unless maybe on the way here, you had some crazy blowout fight in the minivan with the people you love. This is not something most people jump at to obey. And it doesn't seem like it's even possible. Like, if I came across someone who was doing these things, I don't think I'd say like, oh, they're living like Jesus does. So it's like something's not lining up here. And very quickly, if you're with us on week 1 and week 2, we arrive at the same place. The conclusion that no one's actually doing this, meaning no one takes Jesus' words seriously, and Jesus once again is painted as this guy whose words are unhelpful and totally impractical. Like, the mountain is just too hard to climb. If this is what he's saying to us today, right now. What's kind of interesting about this passage is that the people who are listening to Jesus, there were times Jesus said things, and as soon as he was done, people were like, no, that's nuts. And they'd leave. Like, some people couldn't handle it. Like last week when he said, eat my flesh and drink my blood. Some people were like, nah, and they left. With this, the very next chapter, he has more people coming out to hear him. Like, this act, it did not only not repel people, but it brought more people, like the people in society that no one else likes. It's in chapter 15 of Luke. You can read it for yourself. So the question then is, what are they hearing that we are not hearing, right? There's 2 important clarifications here, and this kind of goes back to those tools for tough passages if you were with us on week 1. The first is, like, the question we ask is, okay, is Jesus saying to hate? To, like, in English, the word hate, it means, if you ask Google, she says, to passionately or intensely dislike. Is that what he's saying? No. He's not telling us not to love. In fact, he said many different times, this whole thing is about loving one another. You can sum up the whole thing, put it all in one box, right? Love one another, and that's pretty much it. So he's not saying to actually hate people. The other thing he's not doing, and this is so important, he is not giving an ultimatum, as if to say, if you can't do this, I want nothing to do with you. Or if you can't do this, you're out of the club. And the way we know that, like the strongest argument for like that whole idea falling apart, is that Jesus says these words to 12 guys who very shortly after had the chance to pick up a cross literally and follow Jesus, and they were like, nah, like, that's too much for us. And they left him. And Jesus then came back, found them, and handed over his entire operation to them. So it's not an ultimatum as if to say, like, we're not cool if you can't do this. So what is he saying here? All right? Now, there's really 3 things we have to understand, right? And if you're not interested in stuff like this, you can just like take a quick nap. I'll wake you back up when we're done, all right? But there's 3 things. If you want to like pick this apart to understand what they're hearing, there's 3 parts of it. If you put the verse back up here, the first one is this word cannot right here. When we hear this, you might be hearing may not. But there's a very clear word in the original language that means can, as if like to have the power to have the ability to. The word literally means to have the ability. It would be like me saying, if you can't lift 100 pounds, you can't carry an elephant. right? It's a fact. It's not permission, it's power, all right? That's the first important part. The second idea is this idea of a disciple. A disciple. You and I, if you've been in the church for a little bit, maybe you have no idea what a disciple is, or maybe you're kind of familiar. A disciple, it literally means learner or student. And you might hear that word and just think, oh, Jesus is talking about Christians, or Jesus is talking about, the people he's good with. In that culture, a disciple was one part of a two-part equation, right? Every disciple had a rabbi. And the goal of the disciple was to become like the rabbi. So a disciple went where the rabbi went. A disciple did what the rabbi did, and ideally a disciple became what the rabbi was. So Jesus is educating these 12 guys that he's talking to. He's trying to tell them what he's going to do. And so in saying, you can't be my disciple unless you go to a cross, he's telling them, I'm going to a cross. Like, it would be like me saying, if you want to you can't spend the summer with me if you can't spend the summer in New Jersey, right? What am I saying? Where am I going to be? New Jersey. I'm not. But that's the idea, right? The other aspect of a disciple is Jesus also very clearly explained to his disciples, to be his disciple means to love people like he loved them. So very simply, a disciple, we could say, is someone who loves like Jesus. All right? Last thing. It's the big ugly one. Hate. Hate. Now, you and I hear hate, and we think like to despise or to passionately dislike. We talk about love and hate. We're talking about two ends of a spectrum, right? In the language that Jesus is speaking, love and hate did not indicate ends on a spectrum, but order on a scale. There are two words. The word for love was phileo, and the word for hate was miseo, and these were like a 1-2 punch. You often saw them together. It has the idea of closeness, of intimacy, or of association, like identity. And to say you loved one and hated the other was to say there was more of that with one than with the other. So I'll give you an example. Let's say we're talking about this church, right? I love this church. I love the people here. I love you guys. I love the people that work here. Love it. Love it. But if we're talking about my family, and I was using the words like they did, I would say, I love my family and I hate the church. And everyone would be like, oh, okay, yeah, well, that makes sense. Right? It indicates order on a scale. Or I could say, like, I love my kids. I die for my kids. But if I were talking about my family, I would say, oh, I love my wife and I hate my kids. Don't quote me. So it indicates order on a spectrum. Jesus isn't saying not to love, not to love. What he's saying is that to take these three pieces, right, and put them together, right? We're talking about having the power to be able to, a disciple being one who loves like Jesus, and this idea of hate being like to love above all else. What he's saying is if you want to, not who's cool with me, not are you gonna go to heaven, not like can you believe any of this, but if you want to pull off, if you want to have the ability to love people like Jesus, that love that people don't deserve, that love that people don't earn, the love that doesn't get worn out, if you want to be able, have the power to do that, it comes from loving Jesus. The whole idea here, or to put it very simply, if I put you to sleep and all that stuff's like boring to you, the thing you need to walk away with here is that love like Jesus, loving like Jesus, starts with love for Jesus. Now, to you and I, that might not be like, wow, that's so exciting, like mind blown, I had no idea. But to them, it would have been nuts. Like rabbis back then saying that, like to follow other rabbis, they'd be like, you've got to memorize all these ancient documents. You got to be able to recite these things. You got to fast for this long. You got to do huge requirements. What Jesus says here, right, and this is the crazy part. He's saying, I want you to think about the people in your life that have your heart, like your kids, like your parents, like the love of your life. And he's saying, I want to be in that category. That's what it takes to follow me. Not like, for most of us, we think of God, we think like authority, respect, honor, devotion, commitment. What does it take to follow Jesus? Well, I got to do all these religious things. I got to learn to pray like crazy. Got to be an expert in the Bible. And he's like, no, I want you to love me with the kind of love that you love the people you love most. And that's how you'll be able to pull this off, which would have been mind-blowing to people. Mind-blowing. Now, I don't know about you, right? But in my mind, like inside my head, which is, kind of a scary place sometimes, I've got like boxes. And throughout my life, God went in one of those boxes, kind of jumped around from box to box. For a while, he was in what I would call the authority box, all right? That's the box with like the principal, the dean. After I learned how to drive, it was like cops went in that authority box. All the people that just like tell me what to do, and I can't really do anything about it because they're the authoritative figures of power, right? God was in that box for a long time, and I just kind of dealt with him and hoped that he didn't exist or that he'd never catch me doing the things I was doing. Then there was a stage in my life where God switched from that the authority box and went into like the necessity box, And those are the people like the dentist, You just kind of deal with them because they're important and you can't forget about them for too long or things get bad, right? Like the doctor is in there, my vitamins would be, right? Like you just deal. And then God went in there for a little while. It's like, okay, I guess it's important. Maybe I'll go to church, maybe I'll pray if I can, because who knows, just in case, why not, right? But then there's like the box, call it intimacy, or people you love, like where my kids are, my wife is, my family is, my friends are. Like Jesus is saying, I want to be in that box. And the higher I get on that list, the more you'll be able to love people the way that I do. That's what it takes to pull it off. Now, if you're like me, and love for you, I don't know, maybe I have issues, but it sounds a little like mushy, gushy. I don't like love the idea of just having to just like love Jesus, It sounds like I'm supposed to date him, right? So maybe for you, it's like this idea of loyalty. Right? Because that's a huge aspect of love. Like, do you see him as your greatest loyalty, your main man, your best friend, your greatest hero? Someone who has your heart. Like the closer that he is to becoming that, the more effectively you'll be able to love like he loved. The interesting thing, or one of the interesting things about this is how well it works. If you've written this off as just like, nice religious aspirations, it really does work. Like, You know, imagine there was someone you had to take care of, but you did it because they were special to someone you love. Have you ever been in a situation like that? Like maybe your closest friend, something happens to them, and they ask you to take care of their kids. All of a sudden, something changes because you're able to love out of love for someone else. With Jesus, we have this unconditional, enduring, relentless source of love. And it's him that is asking us to love other people out of that love. In other words, and I'm sure this has worked both ways, there have been times in my relationship, in my marriage, where I just don't feel like showing love to my wife. She just hasn't earned it. You know, or at least don't quote me. That's like how it feels in the moment, right? And I'm sure it's like that with her, probably way more often with me. And if all we're relying on is love for one another, that's good. But when it's not reciprocated, we talked about this a long time ago in another series, love is hard to initiate. When you're not being shown love, it is hard to initiate, but it's easy to reciprocate. And so if we're being experiencing, if we really actually believed we are loved with a relentless outside source, we can reciprocate that love to people who don't deserve it. It actually works. And this is also the thing that will determine whether or not your faith feels like a weight or a relationship that you treasure. The whole idea here is that Jesus offers us not a list of rules, not like requirements to be cool with God, but a relationship that's built on love, which would have been mind-blowing to the people that he was speaking to. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here. But here are a few things I want to leave you with. One of the things that really sets this in motion is actually what Jesus says immediately following this teaching. There are these people that are not accepted in society, and they continue to come to him even after he's said this. And he kind of hits the same topic, but from a different direction. He says, have you ever lost something? He uses an example of a woman. He's like, let's say there's this woman, let's say she's got 10 coins, and she loses one. You know that feeling of just not being able to find what you need? You know, probably you don't have 10 coins, but maybe you've lost your phone or your wallet or your keys. And there is this way it consumes you. Like, I know I got the 9 other ones, but I don't know where that one is. And Jesus is like, is she not going to clean out the whole house until she finds that one? Everyone's like, yeah, okay. And then he tells another story. He's like, all right, imagine you got 100 sheep, right? And you probably don't have sheep, but they did. And he's like, imagine one of them is gone. Like the 99, they're great, right? But you know how that one just consumes you? Like you cannot think about anything else until you find that one? Everyone's like, yeah. And then he tells a story about a family. Like, have you ever lost a kid? Thankfully, I haven't. But there have been moments where we're out at, Adventureland or some theme park or the mall, and it's like for a second, it's like, where's Logan? And it's like once, but then the second time, it's like, no, really, where is he? And then the third time, it's this unexplainable feeling of dread. And now nothing else in the world matters until I figure out where my son is. And he tells a story that basically creates that same feeling in people. And he's like, that's how God feels about you. With that same all-consuming, relentless passion. In other words, after Jesus explains like how to love like Jesus, you have to love Jesus. He then explains how all of this love is not love initiated, it's love reciprocated. To like a God who loves you in a way that you really can't even wrap your mind around. In all of this, what Jesus is explaining is that your relationship to him, he's not offering you a responsibility you have to maintain. He's offering us a relationship to embrace. And the more we do that, the more we'll be able to love like Jesus did. To show the kind of love to people who don't deserve it, who haven't earned it, and who have done things to unearn it. But it starts when we understand how much God loves us.